let's say that agendas proceed a little bit more rapidly, so that some of them you realize that they keep trashing you. You're not actually, succeeding in fighting against this thing. But over here in these other two, you guys have, zipped it along to the top of the scale over the course of some play.
Right.
And so obviously it's going to be a matter of actually playing through it. One of the problems with long form development, arc oriented play is that its mechanics in published games typically are poor because they never play test through. Right. They just keep going to conventions, and their fight mechanics are fine because they've been through the mill, but they have never really managed to, think through what it was like. This game that we're setting up, I'm having my first meeting with the group tomorrow, and they've been working on their characters and stuff. It's one of the fantasy heartbreakers. It's called Undiscovered. And one of the things that they're encountering is that clearly the authors cared a lot about skill development. It's the standout feature. It's the one thing they care about in the system. With every level up, you get so many more skill points. They've got a careful little tree that you can either improve within your current plateau, or you can jump up to the next plateau, right? And so they've got one of those systems, and it's a separate little chart for almost every single skill and spell. They really cared, right?
Wow.
So with their point costs for this. Now, you look at how play goes. You only get a few skill points for every time you level up. They've got a D&D-like structure of increasing thousands and thousands and thousands of points, right, to go up per level. Right. And you kind of suddenly realize, and you're not really getting very many points each time, and you're like, wait, if they put all this effort into the structure of point acquisition and your choices about it, I mean, you can't make choices about it unless you've got the points to do it with. So look how stingy they are about giving out the points. How long were they planning for us to play this thing anyway?
Right.
And you're going, wait a minute. So that's going to be like 10, 15, like huge adventures for every level, to get, enough points to go up to the next level. You got to go through this. And for you to actually have enough points to even get from your little starting 35s and 45% up into the like 65s and 75s for even a couple of skills, you're going to have to get up to fucking 10th level or something. This is crazy.
Right.
So you see what I mean? The pace of improvement versus the experience of play.
Yeah, the rhythm of the game. I totally get that.
Yeah. So again, the curse is you actually have to do it, right? I mean, that's the curse, is that you can theorize all you want, and your brain will lead you down some terrible path.
Yeah. No, the games that or at least my philosophy for the games that I make is that there's a beginning, there's a middle, and then there will be an end. And it will not, my anathema right now, and I get why people do it, and I get why people would love it. But when someone tells me like, I've been in this game that's been ongoing for the last 10 years, I'm like, holy shit.
It's like, why hasn't it ended is sort of what you're asking.
What's wrong with this game that you guys can't figure out where to end this thing? Especially when it's a game that like I'm familiar with, like D&D or even like Champions. A lot of Champions games and a lot of D&D games run that long. Like people have these like insane campaigns that run that long that just are never put to bed. And to me, it's great to have like a game world that you love, but close that chapter and start a new one. But some people, they love it. Me, if you can get if you get 2 years, that is a long campaign for me. A year is.
It also, I mean, clearly we're also talking about modes of play in which whether things happen in a given session or not.
Right.
I mean, I have been in Champions games in the past where it would be 8 sessions before something that you could call an event has actually occurred. And I'm not talking about like a whole like story. I'm just talking about an event.
Right.
And I look back on it, and I remember even at the time, I've never been fond of that. I'm always been more like, you know me, I'm always about pacing and bangs and stuff like that.
Yeah.
You know, keep it going. What happens next? Sort of thinking, and you know, don't wait. You know, if you have the cool villain that you were thinking about, you know, drop them in there.
Yep.
I don't care if other stuff is going on. Drop them in there too, right? And so the deal with this game, because you want it to have a developmental quality. You're talking about the rise of a myth, the formation of a myth. You're talking about change to the world. You're talking about, you know, at some point, the nature of your end, if I remember what you told me right, the nature of your ending as conceived is not the takedown, the prevention of a threat or the takedown of an enemy or the conclusion of a mighty, you know, a mighty confrontation. Those may be involved, but what really matters is when you say, now it is time to look across the world as we know it and see what it has become.
Right. Yep.
And there may not be a big boss element to that. There may not be the classic, you know, build up to the mighty confrontation with the worst of the bunch. That can be involved in its way, perhaps, but it can be more organic than that in this case, because at some point you will look across things as they stand and you will say, now is the time. We see what the world has become, what we have become, and what we have made of it. You know, and that's a different kind of ending procedurally than by the time that, you know, guiding them like a skilled pilot through the maelstrom of your planned confrontation with Dr. whoever, and then say, okay, well, you know, you finally took him down, so the campaign is over, right? And so that's not the same thing here. Here it's much more looking at those institutions and seeing what has become of them, looking at those villainous or at least weirdo, not particularly nice, you know, conclaves and seeing what's become of them. Seeing what's happened. I mean, have I decided to set up my, you know, have I set up the temple to me in Rio de Janeiro? I mean, have I done that by this point? I mean, is that what's going on here? Have I, you know, basically conducted the cosmic manipulation?
Right.
Me and the Virgin Mary, we got it on.
Right.
Right. New cult in Brazil. That's me, buddy. Right.
Right.
So, you know, just to offend as many people as I can with a few quick sentences there. But but the point is that, you know, do we have, you know, young gods?
Right.
Right. And if the game is going to be calling itself that, and if the characters are sort of billed as, you know, you will become this, but we spend most of our time just like building up little points here and there and increasing a skill here and there.
Right.
That's we want to get to the point where we are battling institutions, where we are maybe having mighty disagreements about how to do things.
Right.
You know, stuff like that. You know, the pantheons don't always get along. In fact, I think it's kind of important that most pantheons don't get along internally very well, right? So there's drama there. So we take a look. Absolutely. Yeah, we take a look at that stuff and we say, okay, when is our myth cycle, you know, big enough and epic enough in our fictional world history here to say, you know, and thus the age of the new gods began, right?
Right.
That's what I'm talking about in terms of now what mechanics actually express that. When would you look across the GM's instruments mechanically and say, now is the time? It could have gone in all kinds of different ways. These points could have had a completely different configuration, but the current configuration matches the criteria for saying, we have done it. And maybe there's like, okay, play out the last bit, play out any loose ends, play out any last things that people really want to do that they feel that their character needs to do or try to do. Play that out and call it.
Yeah, you know what? That actually gives me an idea. The myth cycle, especially if it's if there's the end game or your Ragnarok, that is coming.
That could be one of them. Yes, I mean that could be.
Well, not necessarily just Ragnarok, where it's but basically you've got this part of the game, and then your end game,
right?
Which is
when your institutions, when your pantheon actually is, I mean, this is real simplistic, but if your pantheon is actually numerically bigger than any of the other institutions,
right?
Isn't that about the time to say, okay, now the age of the gods is upon us, right?
Right.
I mean, we are the most powerful institution. That's us.
True.
Right? And so regardless, I mean, on the side of some law somewhere or not, I don't care. We're talking about power.
Right.
So at that point, maybe it's the time to say, okay, loose ends. Who's got the, who's got the, who's shit. At that point, it's not the GM's like not in charge anymore. So it's okay, guys, you tell me what you would do. Let's play that out, and then we can close it out.
Yeah. I'm gonna have to
kind of think about that stuff.
Yeah. Well, especially for like the agendas, because the agendas are, like I keep saying, it's the one thing that vexes me the most, the one thing that I want to work. And I've, played a few different versions of it, and some of the versions are, from Hellas, some of them are from Atlantis. Those, those versions. And they
I think
work.
The last version you sent me before these drafts was very similar to Atlantis.
Right.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, there's a few that are similar to Atlantis, and then there's some that are completely divergent. Some that I've simplified, because that's the one thing that I want to do. I want to make it, because my games are never incredibly complicated, but they're perceived as complicated because there's so many things that are going on.
Right.
As opposed to games that, because, if you boil it down to the core, these games are really simple. But I do like the little fiddly bits.
Right.
Like some games, they go a little too far. Like I really love RuneQuest, but RuneQuest.
No, we talked about that. Yeah. I mean, the developed forms of RuneQuest definitely spawn into all sorts of weird little subroutines.
Right. Yeah. And it's like, so then you start thinking I should do HeroQuest. And then you're like, okay, I kind of like HeroQuest, but then you kind of want that fiddly, but you don't want all that fiddly. And that's where I'm at.
Well, at the moment, it's a matter of thinking of what are the core points of attention, the things that you want to change that express what you, for lack of a better word, would call plot. Right. Right. I mean, it's only plot having happened thus far. Right. Right. It's only, as I like to say, plot is what you leave behind as you play. Right. So, if you're thinking of those, then all of a sudden we've got, if I'm going to put them in their order, we've got renown. Okay. We've got agendas. Okay. And we've got the scores of the institutions, including the Pantheon. Right. Those are the contextual engines of situations in play, right? Right. That's both in the middle of play. You're like, well, how does the crowd react? Well, your renown is like this. Okay, they react like that. But that's in the middle of play. But I'm also talking about the generation of situations, what the game master is going to bring as, and this happens today. Right. Right. So those are your powerful things